Alrighty, we are on to another episode of World War II on a week 138, April 18th, 1942. America strikes back. Tokyo in flames. Sound effects. Let's dive in.
He escaped down a cliff on a homemade rope. Wow.
Who the fuck?
Oh, that's pretty cool. And he jumped a train for the Swiss border. Man, that's what? Wait, how old is he? 63?
Huh? Who are we
Wow,
talking
that's really
about?
Cool. Yeah, okay. Yeah, see you. April 18th, 1942. It is the home of the Emperor, the headquarters of the Army, the Navy, and the government. But what Tokyo also is this week is bombed.
On fire.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, Japan's Operation C, a raid in the Indian Ocean by the carrier fleet Kido Butai, came to an end after huge success in sinking both naval and merchant shipping. On the Philippines, Bataan finally surrenders to the Japanese, and the Bataan Death March begins, and Adolf Hitler
Not
issues
yet.
his plans for the summer offensive against the Soviet Union. So it was kind of a game-changing week. And after the major fleet losses, including a carrier and 2 cruisers, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill feels now not only Burma, but India is in great peril. He wants the U.S. fleet to send ships to join the British Eastern Fleet to prevent a repeat of the operation. American Fleet Commander Ernest King says no, and President Franklin Roosevelt says he'll only send some bombers to beef up India's defenses. He does have a little something, though, really not that big of a thing, up his sleeve. You remember Jim Doolittle?
Yeah.
Jim Doolittle. Okay, well, now he's Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. But you remember him, right?
No.
Test pilot, aeronautical engineer back in the 20s, Masters of Science from MIT in aeronautics, PhD in aeronautical engineering.
Okay, smart boy.
He won the Schneider Cup and the Mackay Trophy. You remember him? Come on. First daredevil pilot to ever perform an outside loop. Super famous. First pilot to take off, fly, and land using only instruments without a view from the cockpit. Set the world speed record for land planes
Jesus Christ, what didn't this man do with a plane?
back in 1932. Boom, that guy. Well, he's in the news again. Sort of. What I mean is, he does something this week that's pretty cool, but it won't be released to the press for a few weeks, so he's not actually in the news. Here's the story. Ever since Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt has been bugging his war planners to find a way to somehow bomb Tokyo, Hit them by surprise the way the Americans were. You could send planes on a one-way suicide mission from China, and there would be plenty of volunteers for that, but that wouldn't exactly be a PR coup.
No.
Well, 3 months ago, Admiral King's staff had the idea of sending land-based bombers, ones too big to land on an aircraft carrier, but that could maybe possibly take off from a carrier, from such a carrier that had got within range of Japan's coast to bomb Tokyo and then continue on and land in China. Henry Arnold, Army Air Force Commanding General, likes the idea, which calls for modified twin-engine B-25 bombers. So once everyone else likes the idea, air crews spend a solid month practicing the short-distance takeoffs from a carrier on runways painted with dummy flight decks. And the guy in charge of the mission is none other than James Doolittle. Now, the carrier Hornet, commissioned not even 6 months ago, left for the Pacific in early March. Before doing so, the crew was astounded one day when she went to sea with a couple of B-25s aboard, and they actually took off from the flight deck. Hornet reached Alameda, California, March 20th, and loaded 16 B-25s aboard the flight deck. On April 2nd, they departed, planes lashed to the deck and carrying extra fuel tanks.
God. How the fuck those things fit? Carriers are crazy, man. Carriers
Now on
are
the
crazy.
13th, Hornet joins the carrier Enterprise and its task force north of Midway, forming Task Force Mike. They have to add
Yo, what's
an
up,
extra
Mike?
day to their timetable because they forget about the international dateline, but by the 17th, They are one day from launching a bombing raid on Tokyo. Enterprise is to send out combat air patrols as cover for Hornet, who will try to close within 460 miles, that's 740 kilometers, of Japan. This morning, though, a Japanese patrol boat spots the task force. The cruiser Nashville sinks it, but they think they may have lost surprise. So even though they're still far from where they want to be, and it might be too far for the planes to even make it to China, Doolittle and Admiral Halsey of the Enterprise go ahead with the launch. They figure that, sure, the Japanese defenses may have been alerted, but they're certainly not looking for a bombing raid from 700 miles away. That's 1,100 kilometers. Hornet turns into the wind just before 8 a.m., and in heavy seas, all 16 planes are launched by 8:24. The men each have specific targets they've been briefed on, and they are instructed, in case of damage to their planes, in Doolittle's own words, to dive in full throttle into any target I can find where the crash will do the most good. 2 hours later,
So they started doing kamikaze strikes technically first, before the Japanese. Right? Have the Japanese done any kamikaze? I don't think they have yet.
they are flying over Tokyo. Doolittle's log reads, continued flying low due south over the outskirts of and toward the east center of Tokyo. Pulled up to 1,200 feet, changed course to the southwest, and incendiary bombed highly inflammable section. Anti-aircraft very active, but only one near hit. Lowered away to housetops and slid over western outskirts into haze and smoke. Turned south and out to sea. It's lunchtime, so with the crowds and the sirens, there's a lot of confusion as to what in the world is going on. Many people think it's a demonstration by the Japanese Air Force. Task Force Mike is monitoring Radio Tokyo, so they know that the bombers made it through. U.S. Ambassador Joseph Grew, interned in the embassy since December, and having lunch with the Swiss ambassador, loses a $100 bet because he doesn't believe it's the real thing. Then, over the next 20 minutes, the other bombers arrive, flying in from all directions, having been separated by strong winds. 3 of them arrive over Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, and all the bombers drop their loads and escape out over the China Sea before any pursuit can be organized.
All of them make it? All 16 made it? No issues? Well, no death?
One of the planes does not attack.
Oh.
It has fuel problems and diverts to make a landing in Vladivostok, where the crew is interned by the Soviets. Well, the astonished Soviets. Now, much like the bombing of Lubeck, this is actually a war crime, and Sparty will talk all about that in the war against humanity. Anyhow, the planes are supposed to head to airfields in control of Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese Nationalist Army, who are ready for them, but lack of fuel sort of ruins that. Instead, the crews are forced to bail out, but they get aid from Chinese guerrilla forces, and except for 3 men that die in crash landings and 8 that are captured, the
damn it.
rest all make it behind nationalist lines. The raid doesn't actually do that much physical damage compared to a lot of other bombing raids we've seen. 50 civilians are killed, and 90 buildings are pretty broken up. But it is, as designed, a huge
Doolittle dude it. That is so bad. That is so bad. That is unbelievably bad. Awful market, awful title.
morale boost for the American public. Doolittle himself will receive the Medal of Honor and be promoted to Brigadier General, hopping over the rank of Colonel. The Japanese correctly guess that this has been launched from a carrier force, and the combined fleet goes to sea in pursuit. Combined Fleet Commander Isoroku Yamamoto is absolutely mortified that his proud fleet failed to prevent this from happening. Task Force Mike easily gets away using radar and harsh weather to avoid pursuit. There are some real repercussions, though, and they happen quickly. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who just led the raid by Kido Butai into the Indian Ocean, has been unconvinced about Yamamoto's mid-Pacific attack plan, which I talked about last week. But now he's all for it, believing that if they don't secure the mid-Pacific, then they'll end up having the whole Navy on patrols to prevent a repeat of today. So looking into the future, 2 days from now, the 20th, the decision is made concrete for the combined fleet to attack Midway in the first week of June. This is the third of 3 invasion plans. 1 and 2 are capturing Port Moresby, New Guinea, and making a base in the Solomon Islands. These 3 all are to run in a tight back-to-back-to-back schedule with no margin for error. There is a huge consequence that doesn't get talked about so often, though. Tokyo sends orders to the China Expeditionary Army, that's who's doing the fighting against China, to find the American airmen if they can, and to launch punishment strikes against China's Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces. This is to prevent them from ever being used again for an attack versus Japan. 100,000 Japanese soldiers will go on a rampage there over the next few months, killing as many as 250,000 people and laying
Huh? That's a lot of people, dude. What the...
waste to the land. This will also be a ground for the testing of biological warfare against the Chinese this summer. We talk more about that, again, in the War Against Humanity subseries. One other repercussion is summed up by John Costello. The severity of the reprisals was a warning to the nationalists against repeating their cooperation with the bombers. It also soured relations between Chongqing and Washington, since Chiang Kai-shek had not been asked to give his approval because of fears that his notoriously leaky command would betray the plan. His cable to American Army Chief of Staff George Marshall says that the Japanese have overrun the eastern Chinese airfields and have been slaughtering every man, woman, and child in these areas. Let me repeat, every man, woman, and child. He was under the impression that Doolittle's planes are reinforcements for the AVG, the Flying Tigers, who are under his command. He's not super thrilled when he finds out there are no more such planes available for him. Yet another repercussion is impelling Japanese General Iida in Burma to pick up the pace and sever for good the Burma Road, the only route left for the Chinese to receive Lend-Lease supplies. By today, the Japanese are within 350 kilometers of Lashio, its terminus. Iida's been making good time the past 3 weeks, pushing the British up the Irrawaddy and the Chinese up the Sitang. The retreat has been extra hell for the troops that are on starvation rations with little water and temperatures up to 45 degrees Celsius on roads choked with refugees. General Harold Alexander, in overall Burma Command, has an overarching scheme for William Slim's Burma Corps to meet up with Joe Stilwell's Chinese divisions and block the road towards Mandalay and the oil fields. But the 60-something kilometer front that they make, it just cannot be defended. By the 14th, Slim realizes that he must retreat north of the oil fields, and he gives orders to begin destroying oil installations and infrastructure. By the 16th, the Japanese have flanked them and cut off further retreat. They fight desperately to break out until the end of the week, dying of heat stroke and hoping for assistance from the Chinese 38th Division, which has not appeared as the week ends. One thing Chiang Kai-shek would like, as much of India would also like, is Indian independence. He went there in February and met with both British and Indian leaders, including Gandhi. Independence is a hotter and hotter issue, and Churchill sent Stafford Cripps to India with a proposal from the War Cabinet that promised post-war self-government, possibly with partition to accommodate, say, Muslims, but that insists on British rule during the war. There are counter-proposals. London accepts one for an Indian defense minister, but not that the viceroy must abide by the Indian Council and treat it as a cabinet. So things aren't going anywhere. FDR now gets involved. I read in Tower of Skulls that on the 11th he writes to Churchill that everyone is blaming the British for not allowing the Indians self-government, notwithstanding the willingness of the Indians to entrust technical, military, and naval defense control to competent British authorities, which, as Richard Frank points out, completely ignores that India wants to decide for itself if there is to be any defense in the first place. Apparently, when Churchill gets this, it provokes 2 hours of invective speech, and he calls it rank cant, for a nation which itself had colonized the North American continent and which still practices racial segregation to harangue others about the treatment of native peoples.
Damn, Churchill clocked America real quick right there with that. Yeah, he's like, hey, I know what we doing. Don't be a hypocrite, though.
More on India's position in the near future. A few words now about a couple of Soviet positions. As the spring arrives and the winter thaws the land into mud, the fighting is slowing down, but it isn't stopped yet. Ivan Boldin's 50th Army attacks the Germans the 14th and takes the Zaitsevo Heights near Milyatino. Pavel Belov wants to attack with the 1st Guards Cavalry, still behind the German lines after months, to link up with him and hit them from both sides, but Georgy Zhukov says no. The smaller force he does attack with gets to within 1 kilometer of Boldin, but they cannot link up. Mikhail Yefremov's 33rd Army has also been cut off and operates in the rear, and it makes a desperate push to reach the 43rd Army, the 18th, only a kilometer away. But not only can they not reach them, when they come under heavy German fire, Yefremov, badly wounded and unwilling to be captured, says, "Boys, this is the end for me, but you go on fighting," and shoots himself in the head, ending his life.
Oh.
And here are some notes to end the week. On the 14th, the destroyer USS Roper sinks German submarine U-85. This is the first submarine killed by an American ship of the war. On the 17th, French General Henri Giraud escapes from Castle Königstein. The operation involves lowering himself down the cliffside fortress with 50 meters of rope he made with odds and ends smuggled into him. He reaches Switzerland and safety next week on the 21st. You can get more detail on that on our Instagram day-by-day coverage of the war. And that brings me to the end of this week. A week where a minor operation in scope produces major consequences for Japanese planning, Chinese civilians, and American morale. I wonder what's going through Yamamoto's mind. I mean, he must have thought something like this was possible. After all, he sent an entire fleet of aircraft carriers to raid Hawaii in secrecy, so why shouldn't the Americans be able to do something similar in reverse? But his whole plan was that the Pearl Harbor attack should give the Japanese 6 months with which to secure their new empire before they'd really have to deal with the U.S. That's what he told everyone, and they believed him. But it's only been 4 months, and the U.S. just bombed Tokyo. And, they can kill all the Chinese on Earth in retaliation, but it still doesn't change the fact that Japan is a lot more vulnerable than he or anyone else has thought.
And also thinking that Americans care for the lives of non-Americans. Let's be kind of cynical here. That was, anyways, week 138 of World War II, April 18th, 1942. America strikes back. Tokyo in flames. I got nothing else to say. So, next episode.